Um, Seek refuge in God from Satan, the rejected. In the name of God, most gracious, most merciful. All right. So if everyone's joining right now, I'm covering for my Aunt Shalina, who made this sermon very kindly for us. So please forgive me if I'm just kind of winging it here. But Shalina always makes incredible sermons. So I'm sure we will be just fine. So today's topic for our first Khutbah today is the power of words. Seek refuge in God from Satan the rejected. And let's see. Okay. So the power of words. Words, as we all know, especially in these times, carry weight. They're more than sounds. They carry meaning, power, and influence. And every word that we speak, every word that we utter, has the potential to heal or to hurt others, to inspire or discourage, and to bring peace or even sow conflict. Words reflect the state of our hearts and the shape of the world around us. So, in today's khutbah, we want to pause and consider the impact that our words can have on the people around us, even in our online digital world, even the impact of our words on people that we may not know, and how we can use our words for goodness and to spread mercy, and avoid using them for harm or destructive purposes. So this quote is by Rudyard Kipling, the celebrated author, who said, "Words are, of course, the most powerful drug used by mankind." There are a lot of quotes that come to mind when we think about the power of words and speech and writing. The pen is mightier than the sword. So these are all just great ideas to reflect on during today's khutbah. So we'd like you to think about a time that someone said something hurtful to you. Think about whether they meant to hurt you or not. And regardless of that, how did it make you feel? If you can think about times in your life that unfortunately, we've all gone through that maybe someone has said words to you that were hurtful and it stuck with you. And think about how long just those words stayed with you. Maybe they still stay with you. And you might still feel the impact of those words even today. Now, in contrast, we also want you to think about a time that someone said something kind to you. What do you think their intention was? And try to think about how it made you feel. Maybe, hopefully, some of the words that people have said to you that have improved your mood or made you feel better about yourself still stay with you as well, just as much as negative words have. Um, and when you feel the impact of those words now, try to reflect on how it can elicit emotions even now, much later in time than that conversation occurred. So, reflecting on those, it's obvious that words stay with us. What you might have found with that exercise is that days, weeks, months, maybe even years later, you can still feel the impact of someone else's words on you. Whether that was good or bad, both kinds of words and speech will stay with us, for a lot of us. But unfortunately, it is often the negative words and feedback, that stays with us longer or feels more potent to us than the kind words. I want to point that out because, we have to consider the impact that our words have on us when we express them to other people, knowing how much it can impact ourselves. So words have a real ability to heal other people, to heal ourselves even, to soothe, to celebrate, but also to damage, to hurt, and to tear apart. Um, and so just want to really emphasize that what you say matters. As submitters, we spend a lot of our time thinking and planning out our actions, like our prayers, our zakat, our behavior from day to day. But how much time do we actually spend planning out our words? This is definitely a great exercise for me as I'm kind of going through this with my aunt's words. It's a very, unique situation. How often do we speak without really thinking and reflecting before letting those words come from our mouths? And how often do we speak without uttering something hurtful or saying something that is not true or something that we're not even fully knowledgeable about. How often do we snap at others? Maybe family members or even colleagues. Sometimes the people that we spend the most time with and are closest to us are the people that we might lose patience with the easiest. When we pause to consider the impact of our words, sorry, we start to see them not simply as speech, but as spoken actions, because what we say is what we think, and what we do and what we believe. So, even though it's just words, a harsh word can feel as physical as a slap, and a kind word can feel as physical as a warm hug. When we think of words this way, our perspective really changes because our speech is no longer just noise. It becomes an actual tool, and it becomes a tool that we can use for specific purposes like healing, guiding, connecting, or, if you misuse it or use it without intention, and without reflection, it can also be used for harm. So, what are some lessons about words and their impact that we can look at the Quran for? For one thing, the Quran advises us to reflect on the accountability that we have for our speech. So, I seek refuge in God from Satan, the rejected. In 33:70, it says, O you who believe, reverence God and utter only the correct utterances. So obviously, this is preaching that the words that we say should be truthful, they should be just, and they should be mindful as well. The Quran also advises about caution in speech. So 1736, you shall not accept any information unless you verify it for yourself. I have given you the hearing, the eyesight, and the brain, and you're responsible for using them. So God is instructing us in the Quran to verify the words that come to us and the information that comes to us from others by using our own cognitive abilities and our own discernment. God also advises us to speak kindly. So in 283, God says, we made a covenant with the children of Israel. You shall not worship except God. You shall honor your parents and regard the relatives, the orphans, and the poor. You shall treat the people amicably. You shall observe the contact prayer salat and give the obligatory charity zakat. But you turned away except a few of you, and you became averse. So part of treating people amicably, as it preaches in this verse, is definitely going to involve speaking kind words. And this is in the same verse, notably, where God mentions worshiping Him alone, honoring your parents, and giving to the poor. So it really shows how important, um, amicable behavior and kind treatment of people, which involves how you speak to them, really is. Some more verses in 242, God talks about truthfulness and again, careful speech. So, do not confound the truth with falsehood, nor shall you conceal the truth knowingly. And in addition to speaking only true words, God advises us to avoid idle talk and gossip. So in 49:12, God says, O you who believe, you shall avoid any suspicion, for even a little bit of suspicion is sinful. You shall not spy on one another, nor shall you backbite one another. This is as abominable as eating the flesh of your dead brother. You certainly abhor this. You shall observe God. God is Redeemer, most merciful. Again, God reminds us to be mindful when we speak. In 33:70, O you who believe, reverence God and utter only the correct utterances. And in a from our earlier ideas in the Khutba, God reminds us that our words and our speech have power to help or to harm. In 1424, do you not see that God has cited the example of the good word as a good tree whose root is firmly fixed and its branches are high in the sky? Obviously, we know from seeing storms across the country or things like that. A tree with good roots will survive wind and rain, but a plant with weak roots will not be able to withstand hardship, I should say. So we can see the example of the power of our good words being able to root us in our true characters. In addition to the Quran, there are also many passages and advice about how we should conduct our words and speech in the Old Testament. So there is mention about the control of the tongue in Psalms 141. God says, "Set a guard, O Lord, over my mouth. Keep watch over the door of my lips." In the Proverbs, it talks about words as life or death, saying, "Death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat its fruit." Another mention in the Proverbs is advising us to avoid deceit or slander, and again, using our words for good, saying, "A perverse man spreads strife, and a whisperer separates close friends." And another one in Proverbs talks about the power to encourage and spread the truth, saying, "Pleasant words are like a honeycomb, sweetness to the soul and health to the bones." In the New Testament, it also talks about the power of our words and how we choose to use them, especially when we speak with grace and wisdom. So in Colossians, "Let your conversation be always full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone." And in Ephesians, it says, "Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen." It also talks about how the words that we speak reflect on our character and our heart. In Luke, it says that the good man brings good things out of the good stored up in his heart, and the evil man brings evil things out of the evil stored up in his heart. For the mouth speaks what the heart is full of. And in Matthew, it reads, "But the things that come out of a person's mouth come from the heart, and these defile them." Also in the New Testament, it advises us to speak truthfully in Ephesians. "Therefore, each of you must put off falsehood and speak truthfully to your neighbor, for we are all members of one body." And it warns against using words as poison. In James, it says, "No human being can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil full of deadly poison." That's an interesting verse. It reminds me of some of the verses in the Quran that say that the human being is argumentative. So it seems that those ideas align between the scriptures. So let's repent and then we can go on to the next khutbah where we'll talk about some speeches and see some videos. Okay. I seek refuge in God from Satan, the rejected. In the name of God, most gracious, most merciful. Inshallah, we will continue with our second khutbah, in which we will focus on the impact of words on entire countries, populations, and movements, which I think we all know, especially those of us living in the US, how powerful words can be in inspiring people or motivating people towards one movement or another. So these are examples of words that have caused harm historically throughout the world. The first one, probably one of the most infamous examples, is Nazi propaganda, which was spread in 1930s and 40s Germany. So the context of this, obviously, this was after World War One. Germany had suffered losses and was therefore in an economic collapse and facing a lot of political turmoil, and people were really desperate for stability. So, knowing that Hitler and his Nazi supporters were very intentional with their speeches, they controlled the media and they spread messages that would encourage people to hold on to those ideas as a way to feel stable and in control. A lot of those messages touted racial superiority, anti-Semitism. They kind of played on this idea of uniting people by creating this fake common enemy in Jews. And they also managed to hide all this under the guise of nationalism and a way to reawaken their nation. They would use terms like comparing Jews to parasites and enemies of the state, tying that nationalism to morality and just creating a false narrative. Obviously, as we all know, the impact was that millions were indoctrinated to hate or at least comply and participate in systematic genocide. And it not only influenced leaders in that nation and around the world, but made ordinary citizens, ordinary people, ordinary neighbors complicit in allowing Jews and other persecuted populations to be snatched up during that time. So we can reflect on this and understand and really consider the weight of manipulative and persuasive words and how they can prompt people to believe or act in ways that they might have previously thought unthinkable. Um, and also understand that there is a huge moral responsibility, especially when it comes to public speech and when it comes to the speech and media that leadership produces. Over on our side of the Atlantic, we'll recall the US fears of communism globally, which was something that arose in the 1950s. The context of this was that during the Cold War, communism and its spread globally was seen as an attack against, the United States systems of independence and capitalism. And Senator Joseph McCarthy explicitly exploited this fear, accusing thousands of Americans and residents of being communist or commie sympathizers would be the term. So this was related to, the whole Red Scare. Um, and the words that were used, things like the Red Scare and creating these connotations that didn't really exist and these negative connotations. Um, it encouraged people to make public accusations, even if they lacked evidence. But the repetition of these accusations and the authority behind them would give them made up credibility. So, people were labeled as enemies of the state or enemies of America just based off of suspicion. As a result, ordinary people's careers were destroyed, their families were torn apart, and a lot of people felt fear at just speaking their minds and practicing their First Amendment right to free speech. Um, and what we can take away from this is that even though there was no physical onslaught, there weren't people out in the streets uh, grabbing people off of them like there are now. But even just words back then, without any physical force or physical presence, were able to terrify, oppress, and separate communities. Another example is the Rwandan genocide in the 90s. So, the context of this, Rwanda had a tense history between the Hutu majority and the Tutsi minority. Um, I will say I'm obviously not as knowledgeable about this one, so I won't pretend to be. Political manipulation and economic struggles had already created a lot of mistrust. And so, again, the state used this to create a narrative that people would cling to for a sense of stability, even if it was a false narrative. So, radio stations, most notably the television Libre de Miacoinis, repeatedly broadcast messages calling Tutsis cockroaches, implying a subhuman status and a threat to society. The impact here was very extreme. Ordinary citizens were persuaded to commit acts of extreme violence against their neighbors, their friends, and even family. A lot of fear, hatred was allowed to grow and encouraged to grow, and ultimately led to the mass killing of over 800,000 people in about 100 days. Um, so here we can reflect that especially repeated harmful words, from state media, from these places of authority in human society can also be even a form of brainwashing, normalizing violence and destroying the community that's needed to maintain a social fabric, of a functioning society. Um, so those are all examples of the ways that words can be used to manipulate people towards violence and hatred. But now we're going to take a look at examples of when speech and words and rhetoric can be used for good. Here in the US, that one of the most famous examples is the Gettysburg Address from 1863. So this was following the US Civil War, which was mostly about, statehood as well as states' rights to maintain slavery. Um, it was, the Civil War, which caused unprecedented death and division, and obviously with civil wars there is an underlying current of division and misery because it's all internal. And at the time, Abraham Lincoln addressed a crowd at the dedication of a cemetery for fallen soldiers. And we might not know is that it was actually a very short speech. It was about 270 words. Um, and Lincoln was able to reframe the Civil War as not just a disagreement internally, but a struggle for national purpose, liberty, and equality, and was able to unify the people in that even if they had opposing ideas, the main idea was that everyone wanted the best for their state and their communities. So his speech gave a lot of meaning to the late soldier's sacrifice. It unified the entire nation under a common morality, and it also reinforced democratic principles at a time when those principles were very much at risk. So again, given the very short nature of this speech, it teaches us that even very brief words can resonate if they are deliberate, and they can last for generations and shape an entire society and community's collective memory and purpose. So this is the actual text, and it's so short that it fits, in one paragraph. But it goes to show that succinct and purposeful words, can make an impact again across generations and across even cultures. So I suppose if anyone wants to look at this, they can see it here or look it up online. The next example of words being used for good is Mahatma Gandhi's advocacy in the early 20th century. I think it's pretty well known by now that he was a bit more controversial than we initially thought, but he did contribute to India's independence movement. So we will just take a look at that today. So for context, India was under British colonial rule for a very long time. And despite efforts, these violent uprisings were not succeeding in gaining India its independence. So Gandhi took a different approach and he wrote and spoke extensively about satyagraha, which is the truth force, the force of truth, as well as nonviolent resistance. So he inspired his people to resist oppression without bloodshed. So his philosophy and his words mobilized millions of Indians to participate in nonviolent protests and boycotts and what we know as civil disobedience, which eventually, it helped contribute to India's independence in 1947. So a lesson here, which reflects what the Quran teaches us, is that words grounded in truth and morality and patience can catalyze profound social change even without violence or physical means. So here's some quotes from Gandhi. He said, "In a gentle way, you can shake the world." He also said that infamous quote, "You must be the change you wish to see in the world." Another good one is, "The best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others." And I like this last one. "Whatever you do may be insignificant, but it is very important that you do it." I think that definitely speaks to one person's ability to contribute to the overall good, or an overall movement, whether it's good or bad. Okay. So in this portion, we're going to take a look at the history of speech. One of the most prominent speeches in US history is obviously Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream." So this gives some context and some background on it, which is pretty interesting. So take a look at this one. And
On a hot day in August 1963,
let me know if the audio is not coming through.
Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. delivered a speech that would define the civil rights movement and his legacy. This, of course, was his I Have a Dream speech, delivered on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial during the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom.
I have a dream that my four little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
The March on Washington served as a massive push for economic and political justice for African Americans. Held during the year celebrating the 100th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation, crowds marched on the National Mall to watch a variety of musical performances and speeches. Dr. King, a Baptist preacher and prominent civil rights leader, was scheduled to speak towards the end of the day, his debut on the national stage. Up until that point, King mostly addressed small crowds at black churches, rallies, or fundraisers. This time, he would be seen by nearly 250,000 people on the ground, as well as millions at home watching on television. This was an opportunity to reach a wide audience and persuade the public and the government to take action against racial injustice. The night before, King worked with a close group of advisors to get the speech just right. They worked through the night, settling on a final draft in the pre-dawn hours of August 28th. Interestingly, the phrase, "I have a dream," a phrase he used in earlier speeches, was nowhere to be found in this copy. The words wouldn't manifest until almost halfway into Dr. King's speech, when gospel singer Mahalia Jackson, who had performed earlier in the day, called out to him from the sidelines to tell them about the dream. King set his prepared remarks aside and improvised the rest, crafting a soaring speech that would sear into the minds of millions of Americans.
No, we are not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream.
The speech was divided into two parts. The first listed the injustices that African Americans faced: segregation, police brutality, disenfranchisement, and discrimination, and urged a call to nonviolent action. The second launched into King's dream of peace and racial harmony, a vision of a future in which people will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character.
I have a dream.
Highlighting King's skills as a preacher, I Have a Dream was part sermon and part poetry, using rhetorical devices like repetition, rhyme, and vivid metaphor to drive his points home. It was peppered with historic, biblical, and literary references that moved the crowd. This message of struggle and hope became the defining moment not only of King's career, but also the civil rights movement. Both the speech and the March on Washington were credited with helping secure the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, a landmark piece of legislation that ended segregation and banned discrimination on the basis of race or sex in the workplace.
Free at last! Free at last! Thank God Almighty! We are free at last!
The speech also resonated with activists around the globe. I have a dream. The phrase that wasn't even meant to be in his final draft appeared in political actions all around the world. It's considered one of the world's most transformative and influential speeches, alongside others like Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address and Winston Churchill's Blood, Toil, Tears, and Sweat. I Have a Dream is only one of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s many achievements, but it's nonetheless one of the most pivotal.
I am happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation.
I thought that was a really interesting video. I hadn't seen it until reviewing this real quick before, and I did not know that a woman was the one to remind him and inspire him to bring in that phrase of "I have a dream." So it's kind of a meditative example of how even that one communication changed the course of history by inspiring him to, kind of freeform his speech that day. This is an excerpt from the speech. So again, this is something that we can share afterwards. If you're interested, I'm sure it's also available online. Another example of words being used for good and for progress is Malala Yousafzai or Yousafzai. I don't know how to say her last name. I should probably figure that out. She has been an activist since 2012. And as you all probably know, the context was that she grew up in Pakistan, and at the time, girls' education was being severely restricted by Taliban rule. She and her family were advocates for that, and they tried to kill her as a child for going to school. She was shot in the head and survived the assassination attempt for speaking out. She obviously gained global infamy since then, and with that fame and that position, has continued to write and speak, advocating for the right of every girl and every child to learn. She has emphasized courage, education, equality, and truth. And her words have mobilized international support. She has influenced global policy and also inspired generations, especially young people, to advocate for their freedom to go to school and have access to education. We can all learn a lot from Lala that, especially even in the face of danger and physical risk and harm, that words spoken in courage and in truth and with conviction can change people's minds and hearts across the entire world. Um, this is a clip, so would like to note that she did start the speech with "In the name of God," and I'll show a little bit of this. She was shot as a child, and she gave the speech on her 16th birthday, which is just incredible. So we'll watch some of it.
There are hundreds of human rights activists and social workers who are not only speaking for their rights, but who are struggling to achieve their goal of peace, education, and equality. Thousands of people have been killed by the terrorists, and millions have been injured. I'm just one of them. So here I stand. One girl among many. I speak not for myself, but for those without voice can be heard. Those who have fought for their rights. Their right to live in peace. Their right to be treated with dignity. Their right to equality of opportunity. Their right to be educated. Dear friends, on the 9th of October 2012, the Taliban shot me on the left side of my forehead. They shot my friends too. They thought that the bullet would silence us, but they failed. And out of that silence came thousands of voices. The terrorists thought that they would change my aims and stop my ambitions. But nothing changed in my life except this. Weakness, fear, and hopelessness died. Strength, power, and courage was born. My ambitions are the same. My hopes are the same. And my dreams are the same. Dear sisters and brothers, I'm not against anyone. Neither am I here to speak in terms of personal revenge against the Taliban or any other terrorist group. I'm here to speak up for the right of education of every child. I want education for the sons and daughters of the Taliban and all the terrorists and extremists. I do not even hate the Talib who shot me. Even if there is a gun in my hand and he stands in front of me, I would not shoot him. This is the compassion that I have learned from Muhammad, the Prophet of Mercy, and Jesus Christ and Lord Buddha. This is the legacy of change that I have inherited from Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, and Muhammad Ali Jinnah. This is the philosophy of non-violence that I have learned from Gandhiji, Bacha Khan, and Mother Teresa. And this is the forgiveness that I have learned from my father and from my mother. And this is what my soul is telling me. Be peaceful and love everyone. Dear sisters and brothers, we realize the importance of light when we see darkness. We realize the importance of our voice when we are silenced. In the same way, when we were in Swat, the north of Pakistan, we realized the importance of pens and books when we saw the guns. The wise saying, "The pen is mightier than sword," was true. The extremists were and they are afraid of books and pens. The power of education frightens them. They are afraid of women. The power of the voice of women frightens them. And that is why they killed 14 innocent students in the recent attack in Quetta. And that is why they killed female teachers and polio workers in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. That is why they're blasting schools every day, because they were and they are afraid of change, afraid of equality that we will bring into our society. And I remember that there was a boy in our school who was asked by a journalist, "Why are the Taliban against education?" He answered very simply by pointing to his book. He said, "A Talib doesn't know what is written inside this book." They think that God is a tiny little conservative being who would send girls to the hell just because of going to school. The terrorists are misusing the name of Islam and Pashtun society for their own personal benefits. Pakistan is a peace-loving, democratic country. Pashtuns want education for their daughters and sons. And Islam is a religion of peace, humanity, and brotherhood. Islam says it's not only each child's right to get education, rather it's their duty and responsibility. Honorable Secretary General.
So as Shalina noted here, the speech is a little bit longer, but we can stop there. Obviously, she is probably one of the most incredible people in our lifetimes. I mean, she was 16 here, um, which is just, I can't even comment on it. She incredibly articulate and intelligent and courageous. And she gets all of that through because of the words that she shares here and the words that she has continued to share throughout her career and advocacy. So, from all of those examples, we can really reflect on the power of words. There's a quote that says, "Words create worlds." Words can heal or harm, they can build up or break down, and they can guide entire nations or disseminate, completely destroy nations. They can also wound a single person's heart. All of that to say that every word carries weight. Every word that we speak or write carries weight. Words also shape our realities and the realities of those around us. They can be misused to fuel hatred and incite violence against people. They can divide communities, and they can change how someone even feels about themselves in a negative way. But in contrast, we have to remember that when words are used with wisdom, they can inspire justice, they can bring comfort, they can lead people out of the darkness and into the light, as the Quran talks about and exemplifies, and they can change how someone feels about themselves in a positive light. So with all of that, we need to remember that we have a responsibility when we speak and when we write and communicate, and remember that speech is an action and that we have to treat it as such. We need to choose the truth over rumors when we speak. We need to choose compassion over cruelty, and we especially need to choose patience over anger or reactions. Um, and this is a great reminder to speak only what you are willing to be accountable for because you will be, and we all will be. From a personal perspective, and I know this is advice that I can take for myself, in our own homes and with our own families, again, sometimes the people that we love the most and are the closest to are the people that we lose patience with the most often. So we need to remember that a gentle word can calm a storm, a hard word can scar a heart, and that kindness spoken today will always become a memory for tomorrow and beyond. Um, and that lastly, again, the people that are closest to us feel our words the most and need to be treated with that consideration the most. In contrast, in public, so in our workplaces, in our communities, especially on social media and on the internet and any digital technology, we have to remember that there is someone else on the other side of a message or a screen, and that any of the words that we use towards them can uplift or humiliate them, can include or exclude them or other people's, and that our voices, especially nowadays, have more reach than we think. So when using our voices, we have to remember that it reflects not only our opinions, but our characters and our beliefs. And especially as, self-proclaimed Muslims, we want to be aware of how we present ourselves to the world. So some last reminders, don't save your good words just for public use. Sometimes the people that get the worst side of us, the most articulate and patient and thoughtful parts of us are those closest to us. So we want to keep that in mind no matter who we're interacting with. So some parting thoughts. Before you speak, remember to reflect and ask yourself if what you are saying and expressing is true, if it's kind, if it's necessary, and again, if it's something that a submitter and a Muslim would say, and also, most importantly, if it's something that God would approve of or disapprove of, if it's something that will bring us closer to God or farther away. So with all of that, let's conclude and pray.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله.
Seek refuge in God from Satan the rejected. We intend to do our Jummah prayer today. Two rakats, inshallah. Allah Akbar. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Maliki yawmiddin. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم سبحان ربي العظيم سبحان ربي العظيم. الله أكبر الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى سبحان ربي الأعلى سبحان ربي الأعلى. الله أكبر الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى سبحان ربي الأعلى سبحان ربي الأعلى. الله أكبر. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Maliki yawmiddin. Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. Ihdina as-sirata al-mustaqim. Sirata alladhina an'amta alayhim. Ghayril maghdubi alayhim waladdallin. Allah Akbar. Subhan Rabbil Azim. Subhan Rabbil Azim. Subhan Rabbil Azim. Allah Akbar. Allah Akbar. Subhan Rabbil Allah, Subhan Rabbil Allah, Subhan Rabbil Allah. Allah Akbar, Allah Akbar. Subhan Rabbil Allah, Subhan Rabbil Allah, Subhan Rabbil Allah. Allah Akbar. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lah. Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum.